Hey everybody, and welcome back to our Bible study series. I'm so glad that you join me every single week. This is awesome. So today we are going to study 2 Chronicles 21. Let's get right to it. Then Jehoshaphat rested with his ancestors and was buried with them in the city of David, and Jehoram his son succeeded him as king. Jehoram's brothers, the sons of Jehoshaphat, were Azariah, Jehiel, Zechariah, Azariah, Michael, and Shephatiah. All these were sons of Jehoshaphat, king of Israel. Their father had given them many gifts of silver and gold and articles of value, as well as fortified cities in Judah. But he had given the kingdom to Jehoram because he was his firstborn son. Verse 4. When Jehoram established himself firmly over his father's kingdom, he put all his brothers to the sword along with some of the officials of Israel. Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. He followed the ways of the kings of Israel, as the house of Ahab had done, for he married a daughter of Ahab. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Nevertheless, because of the covenant the Lord had made with David, the Lord was not willing to destroy the house of David. He had promised to maintain a lamp for him and his descendants forever. In the time of Jehoram, Edom rebelled against Judah and set up its own king. So Jehoram went there with his officers and all his chariots. The Edomites surrounded him and his chariot commanders, but he rose up and broke through by night. To this day, Edom has been in rebellion against Judah. Libnah revolted at the same time because Jehoram had forsaken the Lord, the God of his ancestors. He had also built high places on the hills of Judah and had caused the people of Jerusalem to prostitute themselves and had led Judah astray. Jehoram received a letter from Elijah the prophet, which said, "This is what the Lord, the God of your father David says. You have not followed the ways of your father Jehoshaphat or of Asa, king of Judah. But you have followed the ways of the kings of Israel, and you have led Judah and the people of Jerusalem to prostitute themselves, just as the house of Ahab did. You have also murdered your own brothers, members of your own family, men who were better than you. So now the Lord is about to strike your people, your sons, your wives, and everything that is yours with a heavy blow. You, yourself, will be very ill with a lingering disease of the bowels until the disease causes your bowels to come out." Ugh. Verse 16, the Lord aroused against Jehoram the hostility of the Philistines and the Arabs who lived near the Cushites. They attacked Judah, invaded it, and carried off all the goods found in the king's palace, together with his sons and wives. Not a son was left to him except Ahaziah, the youngest. After all this, the Lord afflicted Jehoram with an incurable disease of the bowels. In the course of time, at the end of the 2nd year, his bowels came out because of the disease, and he died in great pain. His people made no funeral fire in his honor, as they had for his predecessors. Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. He passed away to no one's regret and was buried in the city of David, but not in the tombs of the kings. He was a horrible, horrible man. So let's go to my Bible study notes. You ready? So, up to this point in Chronicles, we just thought the kings were evil. They were, don't get me wrong, Their evil was religious evil by allowing pagan idols to be placed and prayed to. But this guy, he takes the cake of being evil. He eliminated all competition to the throne, including his own brothers. Can you even imagine somebody this evil? I can't. I've recently dealt with someone that I feel like was evil. I thought at the time he was delusional. But when all was said and done, I really realized that it was just pure evil in a person. I just can't explain it to y'all. Anyway, but he wasn't this kind of evil. Jehoram, today we were studying this in my Bible study this morning, because I record my Bible studies on Sundays. But this morning we called him Jehoram the Horrible, because he was just so horrible. Anyway, he was just the evilest of the evil. I just can't even imagine a person like this. But why was he so evil? This all happened because Jehoshaphat made nice with the king of Israel and had his son Jehoram marry the king of Israel's daughter. Do y'all remember that from a few chapters ago? Through this union, idolatry was brought back into Judah, and now we see the results of it. He murdered his brothers, y'all. But that's not all. This should be a lesson to all Christians, that while compromise might sometimes appear helpful, we need to be very wary that it does not put us in a position of continual compromise or introduce us to something that's unhealthy that can never be eradicated from our lives. We've got to be so careful of that, y'all. Now, we're going to learn more about Jehoshaphat's daughter-in-law, or Jehoram's wife, in the next few chapters. Let me just say, if we thought Jehoram was evil, you just wait. It puts the capital E in evil. Up at the beginning of this chapter, we read where Jehoshaphat had put his sons in charge of all the fortified cities and given them great wealth. Remember that when we talk about what is in this chapter today, okay? So let's go through the chapter. In verse 2, let's read it. Jehoram's brothers, the sons of Jehoshaphat, were Azariah, Jehiel, Zechariah, Azariah, Michael, and Shephatiah. All these were sons of Jehoshaphat, king of Israel. So that verse lists all Jehoshaphat's sons' names. And I'm just going to be honest with y'all. When I read that, the first thing that went through my mind was he must have only had one wife, or the rest of them were just barren, because that's not very many sons. And you know, Solomon had, what, I can't even remember, 100 wives or something like that, a bunch. And so he had a bunch of children. And so Jehoshaphat here has, what, 6 kids, 6 sons. Now there may have been a whole bunch of daughters, but he had 6 sons. So anyway, that's the weird way my brain works here. So y'all just have to go with it. All right. I think he only did have one wife, because he was pretty firm in following the law that the Lord had set up for the kings. So let's go back to Deuteronomy 17:17, where it says, he, which is talking about the kings, He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. Wow. Think about all the kings that we've studied. Well, really, we don't really know about a bunch of the different wives of all the kings that we've studied. But the ones that we've studied that have said anything about the wives, and they have had multiple wives, and how Solomon, for example, he got turned away from the Lord by his wives. So anyway, you have to be careful with who you choose as a spouse, is what I'm saying, I guess. Because they can easily get you to veer off on the wrong track also. Be strong in your faith. That's the main thing. You've got to be strong in your faith no matter what it is. If it's a friendship or if it's a marriage or whatever, you have to be strong in your faith. So, remember what I was talking about was Jehoshaphat and not Jehoram. Jehoshaphat had 6 sons, and it listed them out. By killing his brothers, he has now weakened Judah in the face of all the other nations around him. And look what happened. Let's look at verse 8. It says, in the time of Jehoram, Edom rebelled against Judah and set up its own king. Because of all the chaos that was going on in Judah, Edom rebelled and set their own kingdom up. Edom had been subdued by David. That's how long they had been under Judah's rule. And controlled by Solomon. Remember, he built ships. Remember, Solomon built ships with Hadad, the Edomite. But the relationship between Judah and Edom deteriorated to the point that now they have developed their own kingdom. And then in verse 9, I guess Jehoram was like, whoa, we can't have that. So Jehoram, this is what verse 9 says. So Jehoram went there with his officers and all his chariots. The Edomites surrounded him and his chariot commanders, but he rose up and broke through by night. Okay, so he was like, let's go take them Edom boys back, y'all. But you know what? Because of everything he had done, God was not with him during this fight. See, back in 2 Kings chapter 8, we learn about the Edomites surrounding Jehoram, and that Jehoram had to take them, that he had to flee by night just to survive. But all this was a victory for Edom and not Judah. Because Jehoram and his men, they broke through the Edomites, yeah. But then they fled back to their tents to hide. So it wasn't a victory for Judah. And so because Jehoram and his lack of trusting and believing and leaning on God, the Edomites are at war with Judah forever. Forever. Okay? And then we get to verse 10. Verse 10 says, to this day, Edom has been in rebellion against Judah. Libnah revolted at the same time because Jehoram had forsaken the Lord, the God of his ancestors. Do we see a pattern here? Because there is a weak, ungodly king in Judah, he is now facing all these cities and countries around him rebelling against him. The people of Libnah worshipped God. And because Jehoram is now promoting worshiping other gods with a little g, like Baal, that's why they rebelled against him. He was the first king in Judah to actively promote Baalism. He pressured the people of Jerusalem to worship Baal and indulge in perverted sex games. I mean, he killed his brothers, and these people knew it. So yes, they were going to do whatever the king said, or else they probably thinking he could kill us. He did. He killed his brothers. Then enters Elijah's letter. Now, we had a very good discussion this morning about Elijah's letter. Elijah, if you go back to 2 Kings and go chapter by chapter on that one, which we did study in my Sunday school class a few years ago, we studied this. So here's the question. How did Elijah's letter get to King Jehoram if Elijah had already been taken away to heaven? This is a God thing, y'all. I'm just saying. In 2 Kings 1:17, Jehoram is anointed king of Judah. He ruled with his father Jehoshaphat for the last 5 or 6 years of Jehoshaphat's reign. Okay? Elijah is taken up to heaven in 2 Kings 2:1-8. 2 Kings 3, Jehoshaphat, advised by Elisha, teams with the king of Israel to fight against Moab. I'm just giving y'all a little background here. Now we go to 2 Chronicles 21. Jehoshaphat dies, leaving Jehoram to rule alone. And then in 2 Chronicles 21, which is what we're studying today, Jehoram murders all his brothers and builds adulterous high places in Judah. And also in 2 Chronicles 21, Jehoram receives a letter from Elisha. So according to the chronological, if you read it in chronological order like this, Elijah was taken from this world during the joint reign of Jehoshaphat and Jehoram. This is on gotquestions.com. I'm just reading exactly what they say, and I'll link to it below. So according to the above that I just read, chronological order, Elijah was taken from this world during the joint reign of Jehoshaphat and Jehoram. The question then becomes, how did Elijah send a letter to Jehoram about the evil king, what the evil king did when Elijah was not around during that time? First, it's possible that the author of 2 Kings did not place the account of Elijah's transition to heaven in chronological order. We know that the Bible is not written, if you put it Genesis to Revelation, it's not written in chronological order. You can on your phone get it in chronological order. So that's a very good possibility that 2 Kings was not written chronologically. I think that makes the most sense. Another possibility is that Elijah wrote the letter to Jehoram before he departed to heaven and left it for Elisha or someone else to deliver. I mean, Elijah was a prophet after all. So that's a possibility too. So either one of those, I'm not going to read any more of that, but either one of those are great possibilities on how Elijah's letter got to Jehoram at this time. Elijah might have still been alive. We don't know exactly what the time periods were of this. Or he wrote the letter before he went to heaven and Elisha or some other person delivered it to Jehoram. I think those are great. Anyway, back to 2 Chronicles 21. Elijah's letter was received. What an incredible illness it's got to be completely miserable. I just can't. That's another thing I can't imagine, is how miserable of an illness this is that Jehoram has to put up with. But he was an evil king, so I'm not saying that anybody deserves to have an illness, but this dude deserved to have an illness. You know what I mean? When God is mad at you and he stirs up your enemies, you know things got really real. I'm just saying. Wow. Let's look at verse 16, okay? Verse 16 says, "The Lord aroused against Jehoram the hostility of the Philistines and the Arabs who lived near the Cushites." The Philistines, the Arabians, and the Ethiopians all came against old Judah and took everything they wanted. Why? Number one, because God let it happen. Number two is because Jehoram had weakened himself so much that it allowed people to come in and just take over, to destroy them pretty much. Then let's look at verse 18. "After all this, the Lord afflicted Jehoram with an incurable disease of the bowels." Ugh. That's when the disease hit him. After all this was plundered and taken away, then the disease hit him. And 2 years later, his bowels came out. Ugh. And the people left didn't even make a funeral fire for him. They were ready for him to be gone. They had struggled these last years, 8 years I think it said, with him in office, and had enough. They did bury him in the city of David, but not in the tomb with the other kings. He was just that bad. So what is the lesson that we can learn here? Number one, we have got to stand strong in our faith, like I said earlier, because Jehoram was, I don't know if he was pressured or if he just did whatever his wife told him to do. Maybe she was just that evil that she compromised him to do what she wanted him to do. But we have to be strong in our faith. So that's number one, we have to do. That's first and foremost, number one, number two, number 1,000,000. We have to stand up for what's right. If Jehoram would have followed in his dad's footsteps and continued Jehoshaphat's mission, and he would, Jehoshaphat had sent the Levites out all over the country to spread the word of God to all of the people of Judah. If Jehoram would have continued that, things would have been totally different. If he would have cut down the Asherah poles, the one thing that Jehoshaphat failed to do, and there would be no high places for them to worship. But he didn't. He allowed his wife to manipulate him into the wrong way of living. And Jehoshaphat's not completely blameless in all of this, because he married his son into this family and knew what kind of family that they were. But Jehoshaphat turned his life around after he was called out for doing something stupid. Jehoram was never turned his life around. So, number two, if you have done something totally stupid and have your life going in the wrong direction, you can make a U-turn or a left turn to get you back on that right road where God wants you to go. So, the lesson learned here is to stand strong in your faith, number one. But if you happen to get off on the wrong path, you make that turn to get yourself back onto the right path. That is my lesson for today. I hope you guys will come back next week. Chapter 22 is going to be just as exciting. I have labeled that as the world turns because it just seems to be like a soap opera. So anyway, come back next week so you know what happens on the next episode of 2 Chronicles. Anyway, y'all have a great week and I will see you. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Bible. Please like, subscribe, and share with your friends.